Like I said, am a computer science PhD student at Harvard, and I work with Hungjin, and I'm advised by Fernanda Vegas and Martin Wattenberg. And I've been really interested in how do we design safer and more equitable navigation technology. And I'm also really interested in some of your thoughts from your experience with walking audits and interest in walking safety about how we could make this a better space. So I was really interested and informed based on some of the annual audit report findings that 66% of fatal pedestrian car crashes are occurring in environmental justice block groups, and that 21% of lives lost in traffic crashes were pedestrians. So, what is the role of technology in all this? And does it help? Does it harm? Looking a little bit more into this, 43% of car accidents were associated with personal navigation technologies that resulted in serious death or injury, and found that some prior work found that 88% involved pedestrians and bikes. This was especially due to missing and incorrect road characteristics in GPSs. So imagine like road surface or width or clearance height. Like you're driving a really large vehicle and you're unable to get through or under a certain pass and might get stranded or stuck, but also this issue of non-transparent and incorrect routing. So a shortest path might suggest a shortcut on a very small or poorly maintained road. It also might suggest something that goes through an area where children or other people are walking and playing that wasn't otherwise a case. People would have stuck on the main roads or used signs if not for this navigation, trying to get them in the shortest way as fast as possible. So a lot of this is that unfamiliarity is playing a key role. So 78% of accidents involved non-locals that were using GPS. So one person said in a prior work, this was the road that it told me to take. I don't know the area well, so I just thought it was okay. And somebody just wound up going through a road that and led to a car crash. The other issue with GPS is distraction is leading to accidents. And people are much better at spatial planning and anticipating other things when they're dealing with physical maps than when they're toggling on a personal device like a smartphone and navigating GPS that's giving them instructions that they're just following. The other thing is that there's a realm of different safety concerns that vary from road condition to crime to identity-based concerns that technology needs to address. So safety planning especially is really challenging. If you're walking or biking an area for the first time, how do you know that that's going to be a good route? Are you going to be trying to walk on a highway or something like that? It's a little bit difficult with current systems. And not only, they typically just suggest the fastest route and don't account for additional details like street lights, crossing, who's going to be walking there, underpasses, and it's hard to know what kinds of features are there. And there's a need for more user choice of what factors to consider. Also, how do communities want people who are unfamiliar to navigate their space? And also a need for alternative walking routes that take into account some of these other factors. So an example of this, I was trying to get from Charles MGH stop to this location, and it suggested that I go this one way. And as you can see in this photo, it might be hard to see, there was, many cars, very little space between the sidewalk. And if I had just added an extra minute or two, I could have gone on through this parkway in a much more pedestrian friendly area. So how do we think through these routes that aren't working? And maybe speed isn't the best way or the only way that we need to be thinking through these routes. So, people have looked at what are some of these alternative values? So one idea is curiosity or discovery, familiarity, sense of community, but also like beauty, calmness, creating more emotionally pleasant routes and connecting people to nature. The other issue is that spatial representations in navigation don't always represent lived experiences. So, for example, if you are going through Times Square and there's a ton of people around, that's going to be a really different pedestrian experience than if you're in a quiet residential area. And there's also this spatial representation component of communities not being represented necessarily on a map. So this work was done by researchers at the University of Toronto, and they had people go around and said, like, for example, In Chinatown, it was represented by the businesses and the names that were there, but the street and the way it looked on a map didn't represent necessarily like how the community would show that. And the other thing is that many of these navigation ring algorithms can be seen as this black box with little user input in understanding how the routes were determined. What does one route mean over another? If you're unfamiliar with an area, it's really hard to compare routes, and very infrequently is there advice given between different routes and things. So some solutions, some work has looked at how do we design this idea of the shortest path to happiness. They crowdsourced which London streets looked the most beautiful, quiet, and happy, and designed walking routes accordingly. And they found that participants preferred these beautiful, happy, quiet routes that added only a few more minutes of walking time. And then they were able to scale this approach using machine learning, predicting these beauty scores from all of these different images in London and Boston to find these shortest paths. Um, but how do we map local knowledge to better represent communities in digital spaces? So if you're unfamiliar, this is OpenStreetMap, which is like in my mind, I think of it as the Wikipedia of the mapping world, where anyone can add to this map and features and things like that. However, there's still a few challenges with this. There's disparities in who has time to contribute to crowdsourcing projects. And add in different features. So that makes it not necessarily representative of everyone. There's also missing road characteristics because this is done on a volunteer basis. And there's a difficulty to use the navigation algorithms that have come out of this map. So there's still this gap between how do we incorporate local knowledge and then what does this look like in a different navigation system. So some work has done this in the accessibility community. So this is kind of similar and cool to the walking audit idea, but what does this look like in the digital space? So to address the issue of pedestrian infrastructure for people with disabilities, researchers at the University of Washington created this Project Sidewalk, which was an open source crowdsourcing tool to conduct audits of sidewalk accessibility. And so they did this case study with a community-driven sidewalk audit using this Project Sidewalk with a Girl Scout troop and local advocates in Oradell, New Jersey. And they ultimately were able to use this tool and in-person and this tool audits to identify high severity walking concerns and recommend additional curb ramps to City Council. However, participants felt that online tools were faster and more efficient, but in order to get that in-person, greater detail, up-to-date information, it was still necessary to be doing in-person walking audits. This was because sometimes the photo of what was available online for a site was not reflective necessarily of the current up-to-date information. A tree could have fallen or a sidewalk could have changed because of weather or other related reasons, and there might be things that need to be more up-to-date. Participants with this also emphasize the importance of who is collaborating and how to funnel data back and incorporate communities throughout the process, especially the disability community. And their findings demonstrated how community-driven digital civics supported accessibility advocacy, education, raised community awareness, and drove this behavioral change towards advocating for better curb ramps. So, other researchers adapted this and created this access maps approach where they mapped a variety of these different factors about how do we avoid incorporate the steepness of a hill, avoid raised curbs or sidewalks that are adjacent to certain streets, based on these community needs to help people who are in wheelchairs better navigate the streets in Seattle, and that sort of thing. So now I've been working on how do we think through this in Boston for pedestrian safety? What factors do we need to consider and what's important? So I want to transition to using the rest of this time for a bit of a brainstorming about what challenges people are having, what they envision things might look differently in navigation technology. So if anyone wants to, and also if you have any questions, feel free to ask those as well.
I was going to say, Brendan, do you want us to continue recording this or do you want to turn it off? Lena and I were talking about that.
I think we can leave the recording on, and if we decide we'll not post the full recording, that's fine. But in case
Back on it, okay.
Yeah.
All right, we'll keep it going for now, Lena.
Cool.
Sounds good. And also you're welcome to like reach out to me. I have a slide with my contact information if you want to share anything offline as well.
Lena, I'll throw one in to get us started.
Yeah.
Since I looked at the 10-day forecast here in the Boston area,
Mhm.
and while it's not gonna rain, all of a sudden it's gonna be 97 degrees next week. So I think shade, uh,
Mhm.
areas that have tree cover and stuff like that could be an interesting factor.
Mhm.
I second that. That's what I was gonna say.
Okay, great. I'm on the right track then.
I wanted to share something. I saw that there were comments in the chat about safety and sort of I think it's like quite related to that note because it's an important one, is like different cues for safety. And this is not so last year I actually engaged with WalkMA to talk about sensory mapping and like some things that I had noticed, and I love this topic. But one thing that Yolando said that I thought was just so interesting was noticing the sounds of children's laughter as indicators for safety. So like walking around his neighborhood, he was like, oh, there's, like certain playgrounds that I'll walk past and there's sounds of a very specific type of public activity that can like really ensure something or tells you something about the neighborhood that you're walking through. And I just really like thought that was so interesting as like an indicator, something to incorporate into like mapping playgrounds or like maybe the most active playgrounds or something like that. And then I also just like as another aside, one of the ways that I'm interested in sensory mapping is because I got a dog recently within the past couple of years, and it completely changed how I walk because I have a small dog who's terrified of buses and no, like loud trucks. And so we never walk on anything that's like a truck route or a bus route. And I don't notice those things as much, but she will hear them before I do. And she'll guide me in a different direction and will not walk on those busy streets. So I have very peaceful walks with her that kind of don't go anywhere, but yeah, if she leads me. And so it's just made me understand moving through space in a very different way.
Yeah, that's really helpful. I feel like it definitely, there's different things that cue you into different walking experiences for sure. I'm seeing Alexis's hand if you wanna
Yeah, I was just on a bike audit yesterday and I was really noticing like also with what Elizabeth just said, like the sound, and I was wondering if you could like do a bike audit or a walk audit that you also had like a sound decibel recording the sound of the environment and track that along with the street at the same time.
Yeah, that's a really cool idea. I think that would definitely like play into that idea of like calmness and being able to see that. Oh, Rachel, I'm seeing your hand.
Hi, I mean, I have to say, first and main consideration is not getting assaulted. And so if you're talking about quiet, that's often the most dangerous. The safest place is where the most people are in most cases. And I always do that first in my walking routes. And I never deviate from that. I grew up in the south side of Chicago where, you got to think about this all the time. And I am concerned that this is not being incorporated. Basically, girls and women are in danger when walking, always. And you're in less danger on a busy street with more people. And if you start saying, oh, yeah, go the quiet route, that may be the last thing they ever do. So that is a little concerning. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point. I think safety, like when I talked in the beginning about identity-based safety concerns, it was typically based on gender and age and that sort of thing. I think there is this trade-off between how do we navigate enjoyable routes, but it does seem as though pedestrian foot traffic, from what we've seen, is a real indicator of neighborhood safety and also like environmental health as well. So thank you so much for bringing up that point. Definitely something balancing for sure. Does anyone else have any other factors, or can jump to the next question?
Well, maybe just this is just to Rachel's point. I was on a walk audit in Lawrence, which is one of our member communities, and basically every single neighborhood tract in Lawrence is an REJ plus community. So if you're not familiar with this city, it's, you know, high dense population and mostly underserved. So we were on a walk audit that connected a street that goes like past a school and a community garden, and then loops through an off-road trail along a river. And it's so beautiful, but it's completely underutilized. And one of the reasons was because they were like, people were saying, well, I would rather walk or bike on this street that has a high crash rate, that, you know, like they're choosing to be in a, you know, walk along a corridor where there is they're higher risk for physical injury from a crash than to walk on this path because it's not lit, it's deserted, you know, there's not enough activity. And one of the things that they noted was that this community garden was so active, and they were like, you know, it, because we know that there's usually somebody there, or there's somebody at these tennis courts. So again, it's like these recreation facilities bringing people kind of to those pathways versus going down, which is like, so, you know, lovely path along a river, you're off the street, it's safe because you're not going to get hit by a car. Well, it doesn't feel safe for the people, you know, if you're walking there alone, even during the daytime. And so people are avoiding it. Yeah, I don't know, just as like an additional concern in that area.
I really have to say, can we please talk about safety from crashes and safety from assaults at the same time? Because they are both important, and the safety from assault has largely been ignored by the pedestrian advocacy world. I mean, it's starting to be talked about now, but I just feel like you gotta say both all the time. Safety from what?
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that was an important part of this
They're not-
community engagement. Yeah, just that they were like, well, we're not, you know, we're like, look, you know, can we divert the pedestrian traffic to this trail? And they're like, no, we're not safe there. So
Yeah,
it's important.
yeah, please remember that, and don't suggest it next time unless the path is lit. You know, I live 2 blocks from the Minuteman path. I would never dream of going on it at night because they won't light it. You know, so just please remember that. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that when we talk about safety and perceptions of safety, there's so many different factors. And I think right now navigation technology doesn't really address any of them. So this is really helpful to hear what everyone is thinking about, and especially in your work with walking audits. Okay, jumping to the next.
Yeah, just one last piece on that, Lena, is
Yeah.
like it's also a very personal perception of safety. Like someone might not feel safe in an area and someone else might. So like that's another factor of, it's a tough thing to work on. Like how do you understand that person's level of perception of safety and how they feel safe or unsafe? So
Absolutely.
If I could jump in. So for Safe Routes to School perspective for us, you know, we love to have every school zone on a map in a perfect world. And any green spaces. So the parks, we often, when we do student route mapping, we try to include the parks or the libraries or the Ys, you know, the common places that in the neighborhoods where the kids, the students would be frequenting. Some of the things we look for when we're routing, and maybe this is another question, but Brendan, you mentioned, you know, more shade trees are needed. And more of an urban setting, it's what to do with the tree wells that are empty. You know, they look they look like everything you can imagine. So, but they're a very much a tripping hazard and et cetera, that is just, it just needs a little love, and all of that put together. So, and lastly, I'd love to have an intern that would take an inventory of all the big buttons in every community. The technology is all over the map, so fixability is all over the map, and all that, and just, you know, making sure they work and that the timing is appropriate. So.
Yeah, those are really important things to consider. Yeah, thank you so much for sharing your perspective. Is there anyone else who wants to share any other factors? Okay. Then I guess the next one was if anyone has experienced any issues with navigation specifically when walking, or things they're concerned about in that space.
I can share again. This is just something I noticed very recently, which is that I use Google Maps quite often when I'm walking, and it used to have like this little I don't know what to call it, like ray coming out from you to show you what direction you're facing. And I don't know if this was just like a fluke, but yesterday I was walking somewhere and it wasn't there and I had no idea what direction I was facing. And I like went the wrong way and I realized like, I was like, oh, I actually really rely on that tool because yeah, the sun was already down and I was completely disoriented. So like just yeah, what direction you're actually facing to me is really helpful.
Yeah, absolutely.
Elizabeth,
I
I'd
know
agree.
I sometimes struggle to like figure it out as well when I'm not. Betsy, I see your hand.
I was basically going to say the same thing. I was recently in New York City and had to get from where this conference was back to Penn Station. And yeah, I walked half a block in the wrong direction because I couldn't tell which direction I was going in because I had no, it was raining, so there wasn't even sun. Not that you would have it anyway. Yeah, no, so it is something that maybe something that if you're going to a navigation tool would be sort of a built-in compass that would show you, or like your cars these days have a thing that basically most of the cars show you which direction you're going um, at the same time. And so definitely as a walker, you don't get that help. But yeah, I ran into the same thing where until you've walked half a block and realize, oh yeah, this was in the opposite direction than they wanted me to go, um, you don't know immediately.
Does anyone else have any other challenges they've experienced walking?
I feel like this also kind of goes back to the last question, but I think like consideration of like crosswalks is a really important thing in navigation because again, like you said in your presentation, like there's like the navigation system doesn't actually know what the environment is really like. And like there's a lot of times where like some crosswalks just aren't safe, even if they're there to help pedestrians get across the street. And so like it's important to know like where you can actually like cross the street safely, or just like what makes a crosswalk good or anything like that.
And the ever popular, it says something like, this route is not exact. We haven't checked it. There might be hazards. I forget, but there's this, kind of lengthy disclaimer on the Google Maps, if you click walking directions, that does not fill you with confidence that, that sidewalk will be smooth and complete and there. And it just clearly they're not checking because they don't care. And that they should check. If you get a walking route, it should be reasonably true that it's all there and available.
Well, I think building on both of those two comments, when there is street construction, like usually either cities and towns communicate that to, some of the mapping services sometimes when there are street closures and stuff like that. Or people using those mapping services that are driving by are fiddling with their devices and mark those off. That is not the case necessarily for temporary sidewalk closures and stuff like that, for different projects. So especially for accessibility reasons, ensuring that there are fully accessible detour routes. If you're telling people to get off the sidewalk onto the street, that certainly would be great.
Hi, this is PNI. All this discussion reminds me of Waze, which is real-time community contribute information on the specific route. And I don't know, I haven't looked if there's any app out there that does that for walkers. But if not, then I think it would be great to have something like that. I think that the keyword here is real-time information. Thanks.
Well, and something which is important is, can you take your street off something like Waze? Because many people have pointed out, they end up cutting through side streets, you know, as though they were main streets, and it's very dangerous. And I think there's some like tricky way you can, I don't know, pretend your street was kidnapped by space aliens or something and get it off of there, but there's got to be a better way. And that may be one of those things that you should have a right to say, no, my tiny side street does not get added as a cut through. End of story.
Right. Yeah, I guess I was giving a narrative, ways for walker, more than what ways, you know, what feature or what downsides it has for walkers. So yeah, but I totally understand you. I navigate through Boston for 20 years, so I know, and Cambridge mostly, I know how bad it could be.
Hi, this is Deborah. Yes, I live on a residential road, 80 homes, a school, a playground, and yet we are a cut through for Route 93. I've been here 50 years. The road has changed so much since Waze and Google Maps came into play. It's difficult to cross the street. So sometimes I wonder, why don't we just sue Waze? Because there's more pollution, environmental concerns have developed. It's just so unsafe now. So I wish there was a way to hide my street. Thank you.
Yeah, this is really helpful to hear like how people are thinking through pedestrian safety and also like navigation for walkers. I see that there's some hands. I think Alexis, I saw your hand first.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that I was in a meeting with Pete Sutton, and he said that MassDOT is coming up with a way to do a sidewalk inventory for the entire state using drones and LiDAR, and that's going to be like happening. So that's going to be a resource that could be accessed by municipalities, but I don't know if there's a way that, I'm sure there's a way that that also can be accessed and evaluated for an app for user information.
Oh, that's really helpful to know and cool to see that there's sidewalk inventories happening. Really exciting. Okay, Elizabeth, I also see your hand.
Sorry, I realized I was muted. I wanted to just respond to Payanai's the comment about Waze and like a pedestrian version, or how do we scale it? Because I did have the pleasure of chatting to some engineers who work there about mapping and about some of the issues and concerns and like comfort levels, and also just like scaling. I was like, the way I walk and the way someone else walks, very different. And they were like, oh, we've thought about that and we get that feedback a lot, but basically it's too subjective. And they commented on like, even from like region to region. So they were saying like people in the South walk in really different ways than people in like the Northeast of the country. And so as like a huge organization, they were like, we would really need to get into like the walking culture of each of these different geographic areas. And then the mapping gets like very complicated. And I thought that was just very interesting, because wouldn't it be the same with vehicles? But they seem to think that like, yeah, on the pedestrian level. And that could have just been lip service. I don't know, but it was interesting to think about.
Yeah, I totally agree with you, because I'm one of those walkers that like to cut through. I mean, explore a new area. And I don't normally look at the device at all when I walk, except if it's really important, a critical part. And I guess I was thinking about Waze because it's more, besides using drone, which is a technology, is basic community, right? I mean, you don't even have to go through like the whole town. Just a certain road, start a certain road, and then it bypass walking path, and it just have people talking about what's their experience. All trail have something like that too, but I was thinking about Waze more because it's more in depth, what community really contribute because they see the value of it. But I'm glad to hear though that there's some thinking around that. Thank you.
Well, let me get this straight. You know, they'll go to any lengths to find a cut through for cars, but finding out about walking is way too hard. Like, priorities.
Yeah, I agree, and that's where AI could help, right? All this machine learning, deep learning, you can really expand this.
Perhaps, but I'd also like to talk to the people who walk in the communities first. You know, what's safe, what's not, why, what do you like, what's pleasant, what's not. Can we please talk to the people who actually do the walking and get that data?
Yeah, great idea.
Yes, I also think that's a great idea and some of what I'm hoping to accomplish. I think want to segue to our the last question and then just some closing words. But would love your thoughts on how we could better support pedestrian safety and community representation. I know some people have mentioned stuff like that, but was wondering if there's any other thoughts. Yeah, Brendan.
So this is one thing that the city of Boston tried a couple years ago, and I thought it had merit, but they never really got buy-in from. They were talking with Google Maps at the time, and it was right when they were first doing their Vision Zero high injury network, and it's related to pedestrian and bike safety, but it was considering whether they should prompt drivers as they were approaching areas that were high crash locations. Like this is a top 5 crash location in the city of Boston, slow down or stuff like that. I thought it was an interesting idea, but Google was basically like, we're too nervous about doing that. And they didn't, I think their excuse also was, this is a slippery slope. We don't want to start doing other messaging in our app. But then they have done so much ever since. So, but yeah, just, are there ways to either warn people to, that they are entering school zone and stuff like that, as opposed to, yeah, just thinking of other warnings based on historic data that we know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great idea, at least to test out more and see if that would help.
Right. And Boston also had tried to can we try to prohibit, encourage Google to prohibit people from cutting down neighborhood streets and stuff like that. And Google also, they didn't say it like this, but they're a company and they want people to use their apps and stuff like that. If all of a sudden other apps were showing a better, faster route and they weren't anymore, would they lose users potentially? So
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's definitely, how do we think through this alternative navigation space and AI with community voices and getting that representation to digital spaces? I think that's really important. I think I saw Liza's hand first next.
Yeah, so I was just thinking this might be a pretty big idea, and I don't know if something like this is already happening, but I wonder if there'd be a way to make almost an app where you could rate or leave a review on a certain route that you took or a walk that you did so that first of all other people can be aware of what that route is like or what certain streets are like, but also then maybe different organizations who might be looking to improve those streets or improve technology and stuff can look at those reviews and maybe further reach out to people because then you're getting community input. And everyone can see that input, and it's also seemingly a pretty easy way as long as a lot of people are using that app.
Actually, for hiker or trails is doing exactly what you're talking about. So model after all trails may not be a bad idea. I would love to see an app doing something like all trails doing.
Yeah, it's really cool to hear those different models. I also really, somebody likes hiking like all trails, so it's cool to hear there's traction there. I see Elizabeth, you also have a hand.
Yes. One thing just like that I noticed is as I'm driving around, I'm like late to everything because my navigation will tell me that I'm going to arrive there in a specific amount of time. And I will, go the speed limit, not hit any traffic, and be about 5 to 10 minutes late. And I think like that is a reflection of how people are actually driving because I know it's a combination of data, but I find that my navigation encourages me to go faster when I shouldn't because I'm like, well, this is the expected time. And while I may be able to resist, I think that it is hard, like if you plan your time because your navigation tells you a specific time, this is like where, it's encouraging speeding. And that's just something I've just noticed. And the other thing I was thinking about, again, it's sort of a bigger topic, but the role of data sovereignty in safety planning, I think is becoming something that we really need to think about because once we, let's say we approve automated enforcement and we have other types of monitoring and the use of AI, like in this digital age, I think that those big companies that are not necessarily prioritizing pedestrian safety, they don't really have incentives. Like they're gathering data from the communities and those communities are generating that information, but then not really participating or being consulted with how that data is then used. So there isn't, I'm not a software engineer, but my understanding is that there isn't really any infrastructure to promote that ownership. And so like, this is at another level than what we can really do at the planning level. But for example, in our Vision Zero plan, with regards to automated enforcement, we do have a clause that if it is passed and if it is implemented, that should be anything that would be like any tickets need to go into any revenue from automated enforcement would go back into the community where those tickets were issued. And so I'm just thinking, I don't have a specific idea right now, but just thinking about community representation. I think it's community representation, but also community control and sovereignty over their own safety. So, like it's a bigger idea, and I know it's a bigger, complicated thing, but I think it is something that we should, at all different levels of government really be considering.
Yeah, I think that's a really great, important point to think about community representation and control going hand in hand there. Does anyone else have any other things that they're thinking about?
To tag into what Elizabeth was sharing, if a community would have, you call it whatever you want, a 311 program, so how do you report something if there's a problem? Some communities used to have them, got rid of them, some do have them, but just so that to keep up that level of engagement and so that, residents can feel empowered enough to, if you see something, say something type of thing in terms of our neighborhood environments.
I'll pick up on what Judy was just saying. We've had very good luck in Springfield with their 311 system, which is you can either do it through the app, call, or through a computer. That's how we've been reporting pedestrian buttons that are not working. And it's amazing. It's been one of the few things that they've actually responded. It seems to be one of the few things they've been actually responding to. So pick, as I said, I think your idea of, the more people who check pedestrian buttons, and Brendan knows of one audit we did where the the count, the length of the crossing was based on, there's senior housing across the street from a high school. And so the crossing was terrific for the high school students. The seniors couldn't get across the street. So, yeah, we've been using the 311 for that kind of thing as well, but particularly for buttons that just don't work.
So whose life is worth saving and protecting and whose is not? Like we need to put it in those terms. Are our lives worth protecting, or is it just for cars going fast?
Yeah, I think that's a great point about easy ways to report when things are going wrong and building up that infrastructure. We can keep this conversation going, but I just wanted to mention, so here's my contact information. If you have any questions, thoughts, or concerns, or any more ideas that come up, feel free to reach out to me. And also, we're doing a larger study on how do we actually implement these sorts of things and what does that look like? So if you have any time to participate in that study and want to share your experiences and set up a chat with me, that would be really helpful to figure out how we can improve this space. But I've really, really appreciated hearing all of your thoughts so far. So if anyone has anything else or any like questions about anything I've presented or work that's currently happening, definitely feel free to ask now.
One of the problem I have on the, chair, bike, and walker trail is having a bike coming very fast, and especially at dusk, right? I mean, when the light is dim. So I wonder, and I don't know in Massachusetts they have anything like that or not. Is it makes sense to limit the number of the bikers during dusk and dawn, and especially those who don't turn on the headlights. It's very difficult for walkers like me anyway. I mean, talk about safety here.
Absolutely. I think that's something else we need to consider. Does anyone else have any other thoughts they want to share?
Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me and all discussing what this could look like, because I think there's really important work that needs to be tackled from all different angles to get better pedestrian safety and encourage walking.
Yeah, this was great. Thanks so much for being here, Lena, and sharing some of the interesting stuff that you and some of your classmates are working on. There are a bunch of like comments in the chat as well, so I would just make sure that I think most of them have been addressed, but there were some links as well that you might find useful. Anjin copied them, so that's great. So, fantastic. Well, thank you so much, and thanks everyone else for being here as well. Next month we are going to be getting a little bit of a legislative update from Transportation for Massachusetts, kind of big picture, different legislative things that are happening across the state. However, if you also have any bills or topics that you know of at the State House that you're very interested in and you want to bring as a discussion point or to get people to speak up about it, feel free to either send that to any of the WalkMA staff in advance or come and make a pitch for it during the discussion. Happy to make room for that as well. So
I can also add, the 26th next week, we're going to be doing a 6 p.m. walk audit in the Brockton area. If people are in that area and want to join us, it will be our second one for our Brockton cohort for Walk Audit Academy.
Yeah, and it will be pretty warm, so we will be looking at sections. We do have a handheld thermometer, so we're going to be looking at different heat in maybe some of the parks along the way versus the streets and sidewalks. So, yeah, love that.
Brendan has vivid memories of a walk audit we did in Springfield on what had to have been the hottest evening of the year.
Yeah, it was I think it was a cool 86 in the shade when we were done.
So
But
we really recognized the trees.
yeah, for sure. We were hopping between them. I think it was like 113 on the pavement in the parking lot.
Where we had people meet, yes.
Yeah, yeah. But it was, only 90 degrees in the shade. So like it was such a difference when you were, 15 feet away in the shade under the trees versus the middle of the parking lot.
Mm.
Great.
Good.
Well, thanks so much, everybody, and hope to see you soon.